becomes homeless. As my novel opens, he's homeless with a friend of his that he's made from Mexico called Jose Juan. And they wander the city trying to sort of find shelter and find work. And one day Antonio, my protagonist, is in the park, which of course many of you know is the great meeting area, the central plaza of Central American Los Angeles. And while there, he sees someone playing chess. A very short man, very prieto, very cinnamon-skinned, and he has a tattoo on his arm. And it takes Antonio a few seconds to realize that this is the person who killed his wife and child back in Guatemala. And he plots his revenge. And in that sense, it's a very traditional story of revenge. And Antonio plots to get back. He plots to kill this person. He goes about it several different ways. And then he's given this great window, this opportunity to get his revenge, which is the 1992 Los Angeles riots. And I call it the great day of, the great municipal day of reckoning, right, of vengeance. Because all the sort of seething inequities of Los Angeles are dealt with that day in a very, very visceral, very violent way. And so Antonio uses this window to try and kill the soldier, and I won't give away the rest of the plot because I'd like you to buy it and read it if you haven't already. Now, this plot really of this novel is my way as a writer of joining together two of the central elements of my own experience. One is my experience as a son of Guatemalteco immigrants, and the other is my experience as a Los Angeles scribe, as a witness of the California experience. Now, as a son of Guatemalan immigrants, I had the stories my father told me and my mother told me of growing up in Guatemala. My father, stories of small town Guatemala. Those stories are sort of the basis for the Guatemala chapters, and of my own visits, because in the late 1980s, I visited Guatemala often as a young college student, and I saw the war there. A lot of the imagery of destruction that takes place in The Tattooed Soldier are images of my own personal experience. And so there's that, Guatemala, and there's Los Angeles, because I was a reporter, a metro reporter in LA in the late 1980s and early 1990s. I was a general assignment reporter, and my main responsibility was originally sort of night cops is where you start when you're a reporter. You start at the very bottom of the totem pole. You go cover police shootings, or at least you used to. Now the totem pole doesn't even exist anymore because newspapers are going out of business. But that's the way I got started as a reporter, and so I learned to see, I'm a Los Angeles native, and so I learned to see this city as the police would see it, or as people would see it who are sort of, their lives are sort of wrapped up in crime. And so I saw that part of the city, and then I started writing a lot of stories about homelessness. And so I saw the city from the point of view of its homeless communities. And then I, of course, wrote many stories about Guatemalan and Salvadoran and Mexican immigrants and the institutions they were creating. And so The Tattooed Soldier really is my way of joining those experiences together with the arc of this narrative of a story that begins in Guatemala and ends during this transformative event in the city, in the history of the city of Los Angeles, which is the 1992 riots. And to me, it was really the sort of first central image that I latched onto was the destruction in central Los Angeles. Now where we have the Belmont Learning Center, the school that was never quite completed or that it hasn't opened yet, that used to be open vacant lots because there was this idea that it was going to be the next financial district. And so lots of developers had bought up all this land and they had leveled all these old homes of a neighborhood that was a lot like Bunker Hill, old Victorians, old clapboard houses. They had leveled this neighborhood and there were some ruins left, and but yet there were a lot of homeless camps. And so for me, here we are in this heart of LA, one of the oldest parts of Los Angeles, and yet here we find this destruction. And so for me, that was a very powerful metaphor for what Los Angeles was. And to me, Los Angeles, in The Tattooed Soldier especially, is an imperial city. Los Angeles is a city that grew rich thanks to the Pax Americana, thanks to the growth after World War II, especially in the United States. A city that its own way is a base for the aerospace industry, right? So it's a city that in a way is an imperial capital that's sending off all of this technology to wage war in the periphery, to wage war in the colonies. And what happened in the late 20th century is that the refugees, the wounded, the people who had been psychologically damaged by this war come to Los Angeles to live in the very heart of its city. And for me, that was a really powerful contradiction, and that's sort of the main image that I built the first part of my novel on. And I'd like to read you really briefly a section in which my character, my protagonist, Antonio, and his friend, Jose Juan, are wandering. They're looking for shelter. They've established a little camp for the night, and they're up their second day. And Jose Juan wanders around this area. It's called Crown Hill. It still exists, although now there's soccer fields on it and whatnot. But in that time, it was homeless camps. And he discovers something as he's walking around. He discovers the foundations of an early 20th century Victorian home. And he says, "Right here, this was their garden," Jose Juan said. "That was their garage." He jumped a few steps to his left. "Over here was their bedroom. And see this, these bricks? This had to be the fireplace, see? A fireplace to sit by when it's cold like it is now. A nice hot fire to keep warm. Can you see it, can you?" Antonio looked around at the land around him. There was the green hill, with perhaps a dozen tents and shacks perched on its muddy earth. Underneath these ephemeral structures were the ruins of a lost community, a forgotten neighborhood built with brick and cement. On the hill and on the flat plain that extended from its base, he could see a grid of city streets, blocks of land cut in rectangles and bordered with sidewalks, asphalt avenues with iron manhole covers for the sewers. Dozens and dozens of concrete stairs led from the streets to what used to be front lawns. In all, Antonio counted more than 40 demolished lots, a whole section of the city leveled to an expanse of wild grasses. Only the palm trees had survived the disaster that swept through this place. Tall, majestic trees that looked very old, each with a heavy crown of dry leaves near the top, like a lion's mane. To the east, looming over the open plain, were the skyscrapers, an ocean wave of steel and glass. To the west, the empty fields came to an end, and the city started again, now closer to the ground. Not skyscrapers, but stubby apartment buildings, liquor stores, fading stucco houses. Antonio closed his eyes and tried to imagine what once stood on this barren land. Elena, his late wife, Elena always said I had an overactive imagination. He could feel the souls of the children who lived in this place. Their after-school games and innocent wanderings. What sin did their parents commit, he wondered, to bring such destruction upon themselves? Jose Juan lay down on the tile floor and stretched out with a lazy yawn. "We have a home, our own little rancho," he said. "It's ours to own, a nice piece of property next to downtown." You know, Mexicanos are always so ironic. Several hundred yards away, two men huddled around a fire that blazed in an oil barrel, the smoke drifting upward and settling into a thick haze. In Guatemala, Antonio saw cornfields set ablaze, swirling rains of ash and ember, veils of smoke that lingered for days like fog in the mountain valleys. He remembered bridges that fell into rivers, asphalt and steel swallowed by white tongues of water. He looked at the wild urban grasses before him and remembered the hills near Huehuetenango, where he once encountered a single-file column of soldiers, a camouflaged serpent on the march, disappearing suddenly into the dense foliage. The vacant property, the plastic shelters, the ruined homes. The more he thought about it, the more Antonio began to feel a kinship with the flattened earth around him. So that's my novel, The Tattooed Soldier. And I have since tried to continue writing, and I have to say I gave up writing fiction for a while because I realized it was, my mentor, Thomas Keneally, once told me that it was something that fools did rush to fail. And I thought, I had published one novel, I tried to write a second, and I rushed it, and it didn't sell, and I felt really terrible. It was hard to even go into bookstores, that's how bad it was, because I just had these sort of pangs of jealousy and envy and just, failure. And so I wrote another book that was nonfiction. But when that book came out, I'd go to book fairs, and people who had read The Tattooed Soldier, and they were very often 19, 20, 21 years old, and they had read The Tattooed Soldier, and they had been really moved by it. It was something very close to their experience. And I remember one young man from El Salvador telling me that he had given this book to his father. And his father had said, his father had never read a book before in English. And his father plowed through it, and he came to his son and he said, son, now you understand what I went through in El Salvador.